In the vast Wyoming wilderness, a young Mustang was found chained to disused railroad tracks, left to die. As all hope seemed lost, a miracle unfolded. This is a story of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between man and beast. Stay tuned for a heartwarming journey that will change the way you see courage and compassion. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to stay inspired by stories like this one. The sun dipped low over the Wyoming wilderness, painting the vast plains in hues of gold and amber. A faint breeze whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant hum of crickets. It was a peaceful scene, except for the sharp, discordant cries of a lone crow circling above. Jackson Miller adjusted his hat as he guided his aging truck down the dusty backroads leading to his ranch. His faithful dog, Rusty, sat alert in the passenger's seat, his ears twitching with every sound. To Jackson, this route was as familiar as the creases in his weathered hands, but today, an uneasy feeling gnawed at his gut. Rusty's sudden growl jolted Jackson from his thoughts. The dog barked furiously, his body tensing as they approached a bend in the road. Jackson slowed the truck and squinted into the distance. His sharp blue eyes caught an unusual glint of metal reflecting the setting sun. He parked the truck on the roadside and grabbed his rifle, just in case. Rusty bounded ahead, his barks echoing across the quiet plains. Jackson followed, his boots crunching against the gravel, until the scene came into view, a sight that made his breath hitch. A horse, no, not just any horse, a young Mustang, wild and majestic, its coat a deep chestnut that shimmered even under the fading sunlight, was chained to the rusty rails of an old, disused train track. The animal's sides heaved with labored breaths, and its eyes were wide with terror. Jackson froze for a moment, horrified. Who could do something so cruel? The tracks hadn't been in use for years, but the act of chaining a living creature to them was nothing short of malicious. Rusty whined, nudging Jackson forward. "Easy, boy," Jackson murmured. "We're here to help." He approached cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate. The Mustang snorted and reared as much as the chains would allow, its hooves striking sparks against the iron tracks. Jackson's heart broke at the sight of the deep gashes the chains had carved into the animal's legs, the blood staining its once pristine coat. "Whoa, easy there," Jackson said softly, his voice steady and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you, fella. Just need to get these off you." He pulled a pair of bolt cutters from his truck and knelt beside the horse, careful to avoid its frantic kicks. The Mustang flared its nostrils and eyed him with suspicion, but something in Jackson's tone seemed to calm it. Rusty lay down a few feet away, his presence a reassuring constant. Jackson worked quickly but carefully, his hands steady despite the rising tension in his chest. The chains were old and rusted, but they held firm. Each cut required all the strength he could muster. With every snap of the metal, the Mustang flinched but stayed still, as if understanding Jackson's intent. Finally, the last link fell away, and the horse sprang free. Its movements were a mix of relief and pent-up energy. It didn't run, though, not yet. It stood there, towering and proud, its gaze locked on Jackson. For a moment, man and beast simply stared at one another, a silent understanding passing between them. "You're free now," Jackson said, rising to his feet. "But if you stay out here alone, it won't be long before someone tries to hurt you again." The Mustang pawed at the ground, its ears flicking back and forth. It didn't move as Jackson extended a hand, offering it the chance to choose. Jackson stood motionless, his hand extended toward the Mustang. The animal's wild eyes flickered between the man and the open plains behind him. For a moment, Jackson thought the horse might bolt, but instead it let out a heavy, exhausted sigh and lowered its head slightly. "That's it, fella," Jackson whispered. "You're safe now." Carefully, he looped a rope around the Mustang's neck, not to restrain but to guide. The horse flinched but didn't resist, its energy depleted after the ordeal. Rusty trotted beside them, his presence seeming to reassure the Mustang as Jackson led it back to his truck. Loading the horse was no small feat, though it was weak. The Mustang still had a fiery spirit, pawing at the ramp and tossing its head. Jackson admired its tenacity. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he murmured gently, coaxing the animal into the trailer. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle from the trailer. Jackson's mind raced with questions. Who could have done such a thing and why? But for now, his focus was on helping the Mustang heal. At the ranch, the Mustang stepped hesitantly into the corral, its ears flicking nervously at every sound. Jackson had prepared a soft bed of hay and a trough of fresh water, but the horse ignored both, standing rigid as a statue. "You'll come around," Jackson said, leaning against the fence. He watched as the Mustang surveyed its surroundings, every muscle tense. That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. Memories of his son, Luke, filled the quiet spaces of the house. Luke had loved horses, especially Mustangs. He'd always said they were a symbol of freedom and resilience. The thought made Jackson's chest tighten. In the morning, he found the Mustang in the same spot, its head low but eyes alert. He approached slowly, holding out a handful of oats. The horse eyed him wearily, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the offering. Finally, it took a tentative step forward and nibbled at the grains. "There you go," Jackson said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're a fighter, aren't you? I think I'll call you Thunder." The name seemed to suit the horse, its fiery spirit and dark coat reminiscent of a storm. Over the next few days, Thunder began to relax, though he still kept his distance. Jackson worked patiently, spending hours sitting quietly by the corral, letting the horse grow accustomed to his presence. One afternoon, Sheriff Kate Harper pulled up to the ranch in her dusty patrol car. She stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Heard about your rescue," she said, nodding toward Thunder. "Mind if I take a look?" Jackson led her to the corral where Thunder stood, watching with guarded eyes. Kate's face hardened as she took in the scars on the horse's legs. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "Whoever did this wanted him to suffer. You think it's connected to that illegal racing ring you've been investigating?" Jackson asked. Kate nodded. "It's likely. Horses like this, they don't break easily. If they can't control them, they get rid of them." The thought made Jackson's blood boil. He looked at Thunder, standing tall despite everything it had endured. "Well, they didn't break this one," he said firmly. Kate placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got your work cut out for you, Jackson, but if anyone can help him, it's you." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson stood by the corral, watching Thunder graze for the first time. A sense of quiet determination settled over him. He didn't just want to heal Thunder. He wanted to show the horse that not all humans were cruel. The days passed slowly, each one a step forward in rebuilding Thunder's trust. The Mustang had begun to accept Jackson's presence, though any sudden movement would send him retreating to the far end of the corral. Jackson, patient and steady, spent every free moment near the horse, sometimes speaking in low tones, sometimes simply sitting quietly. He noticed the way Thunder's ears flicked toward his voice, even when the horse pretended not to care. One morning, Jackson decided it was time for the next step. He entered the corral with a soft rope halter, moving deliberately to avoid startling the Mustang. Thunder stiffened but didn't bolt. Jackson murmured reassurances, his voice as calm as the gentle breeze sweeping the plains. Slowly, he slipped the halter over Thunder's head. The horse snorted and tossed its head, but Jackson didn't flinch. "That's it, boy," he said. "Just breathe." The training sessions were brief, each one ending on a positive note. Thunder began to respond to the cues, his movements less frantic and more deliberate. Jackson's heart swelled with pride as he watched the Mustang take its first hesitant steps toward trust. Still, the scars on Thunder's legs were a constant reminder of the cruelty he'd endured. As Jackson worked with Thunder, memories of his son grew stronger. Luke had been fearless, always the first to climb on the back of a wild horse. Jackson could almost hear his laughter echoing across the fields. The ache of loss was a constant companion, but Thunder's progress brought a flicker of light into Jackson's life. One afternoon, Kate returned to the ranch, a grim expression on her face. We found out more about the racing ring, she said, leaning against the fence. It's worse than we thought. They've been targeting wild Mustangs, using brutal methods to break them for illegal races. The ones that resist, she glanced at Thunder, her voice trailing off. Jackson clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. And the people responsible? Kate sighed. We're close, but they're careful. They move the horses constantly, keeping just ahead of the law. We need someone who knows the land, someone they wouldn't suspect. The implication was clear. Jackson's jaw tightened as he looked at Thunder, who stood grazing peacefully. He knew the risks, but the thought of letting those responsible go unpunished was unbearable. That night, Jackson sat by the fire, staring into the flickering flames. Rusty lay at his feet, his eyes half closed. Thunder's silhouette was visible through the window, the Mustang standing tall against the backdrop of a star-filled sky. Jackson made his decision. If helping Kate meant putting himself in danger, so be it. Thunder deserved justice, and so did every other horse that had suffered at the hands of those monsters. The next morning, Jackson saddled his old mare, Daisy, and prepared to head into town. Thunder watched from the corral, his ears pricked forward. Jackson paused, his hand resting on the gate. I'll be back, he said softly. You just keep getting stronger. As he rode away, a sense of purpose filled Jackson's chest. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to fight. For Thunder, for Luke's memory, and for every horse that had been denied the freedom it deserved. The sun had barely risen when Jackson reached the sheriff's office. The air was heavy with the scent of rain. Inside, Kate was reviewing maps spread across her desk, each one marked with potential locations of the illegal racing ring. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. Glad you're here, Jackson. We got a lead. Kate explained the plan in a low voice, her tone tense. A rancher on the outskirts of town had reported suspicious activity, trailers moving in the dead of night, the sounds of horses and men shouting. It was the best lead they'd had in weeks. Jackson nodded, his jaw set. I'll check it out. Later that evening, Jackson saddled Daisy and set out under cover of darkness. The sky was thick with storm clouds, and lightning flickered on the horizon. The path was rough, winding through dense woods and narrow ravines. Rusty trotted silently at his side, his nose low to the ground. Hours passed before Jackson spotted the faint glow of lanterns in the distance. He dismounted, tying Daisy to a tree, and crept forward on foot. Rusty stayed close, his ears perked. The clearing ahead was filled with activity. Men loading frightened horses into trailers, their movements hurried and rough. Jackson's blood boiled as he watched them shove a young mare into a cramped cage, her screams piercing the night. Suddenly, a branch snapped beneath his boot. He froze, his heart pounding. One of the men turned, his flashlight sweeping the trees. Jackson ducked behind a fallen log, holding his breath. Rusty crouched low, his body tense. The man muttered something and moved on, the beam of light disappearing into the shadows. Jackson exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He needed to act fast, but he couldn't risk being caught. He scanned the clearing, noting the positions of the men and the trailers. Then an idea struck. He pulled a small flare gun from his pack, aiming it at the far side of the camp. The flare shot into the sky, its fiery trail lighting up the night. The men shouted in alarm, scrambling toward the sudden burst of light. Jackson seized the opportunity, slipping into the clearing. He reached the young mare's cage, his hands working quickly to unlatch the door. The horse bolted, her hooves striking the ground like thunder. Jackson turned to free another horse when a voice rang out behind him. Hey, who the hell are you? Jackson spun around to see a burly man charging toward him, a club in hand. Rusty leapt forward, growling fiercely, giving Jackson enough time to dodge the attack. He swung his fist, connecting with the man's jaw. The club clattered to the ground. More shouts erupted as the other men returned, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Jackson grabbed Rusty and ran, his heart pounding. Horses whinnied and stomped, their panic adding to the chaos. Jackson reached Daisy and swung into the saddle, urging her into a gallop. Rusty followed, his lean body moving effortlessly through the trees. The storm broke as they rode, rain lashing against Jackson's face. He didn't slow until the camp was far behind, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Lightning illuminated the path ahead, and for a moment, Jackson thought he saw Thunder's silhouette in the distance, standing tall and proud. By the time they reached the ranch, Jackson was soaked to the bone, his body aching. Thunder stood at the edge of the corral, his ears twitching as Jackson approached. "We're going to get him," Jackson said, his voice firm. "All of them." Dawn broke with a fiery glow, casting long shadows over Jackson's ranch. Thunder paced in the corral, his movements restless and agitated. Jackson watched from the porch, his coffee untouched. The events of the previous night played over in his mind. The frightened horses, the men's cruelty, and the narrow escape. He knew he had only scratched the surface of a much larger operation. Kate arrived mid-morning, her patrol car kicking up a cloud of dust. She stepped out, carrying a thick folder. "We've got a problem," she said, her expression grim. Jackson motioned for her to follow him inside. Rusty wagged his tail briefly before lying down by the door, sensing the tension. Kate spread out the contents of the folder on the kitchen table. Photographs of trailers, documents with fake branding, and a map marked with red circles. "They're moving faster than we expected," she said. "We found another camp this morning. Empty. They're packing up and disappearing before we can get to them." Jackson studied the map, his eyes narrowing. "They're staying ahead because they know the land better than you do. But I've spent my whole life out here. I can predict where they'll go next." Kate raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you want to lead this?" "I'm saying I have to," Jackson replied. "Those horses don't have time for bureaucracy. If we wait for backup, it'll be too late." Kate hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you're not going alone. We'll put together a team." That afternoon, Jackson returned to the corral where Thunder stood watching him. The Mustang's dark eyes seemed to reflect the turmoil in Jackson's heart. "You're a fighter," Jackson said, stroking the horse's neck. "And I need that fight now." For the first time, Thunder didn't pull away from the touch. Jackson took it as a sign. Over the next few hours, he prepared for the mission. Daisy was saddled, supplies packed, and the plan finalized with Kate. Thunder, though not ready to be ridden, would stay behind under the care of a trusted neighbor. As the sun dipped low, Jackson and the small team of volunteers set out. Their destination was a remote canyon accessible only by a narrow pass that Jackson knew well. If his hunch was correct, the traffickers would use the area as a temporary holding site before moving deeper into the wilderness. The ride was tense, the group moving silently through the fading light. Jackson's mind raced with thoughts of the horses they might save and the risks they faced. He couldn't shake the image of Thunder chained to the tracks, a reminder of what was at stake. They reached the canyon just as darkness fell. Jackson dismounted and signaled for the others to spread out. Rusty trotted ahead, his nose to the ground. The night was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent. Jackson's gut told him they were close. Suddenly, Rusty froze, his body stiff. Jackson followed the dog's gaze and saw the faint glow of lanterns in the distance. He motioned for the others to stay back and crept forward, his footsteps silent on the rocky ground. What he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of horses were crammed into makeshift pens, their eyes wide with fear. Men moved among them, some carrying whips, others talking in hushed tones. A truck idled nearby, its trailer waiting to be loaded. Jackson's hands clenched into fists. This was worse than he'd imagined. He retreated to the group and quickly outlined the plan. They would cut the fences, release the horses, and create enough chaos to force the traffickers to flee. It was risky, but they had no choice. "We move fast and stay together," Jackson said. "These horses are counting on us." The team sprang into action, their movements swift and coordinated. Jackson worked on one of the pens, his bolt cutters slicing through the chain link. The horses bolted, their hooves thundering against the ground. Shouts erupted as the traffickers scrambled to regain control. Amid the chaos, Jackson spotted a young colt struggling to free itself from a tangle of ropes. He rushed forward, ignoring the danger, and cut the colt loose. The little horse nuzzled him briefly before galloping into the night. Gunshots rang out, and Jackson ducked behind a trailer. Kate's voice crackled over the radio. "They're armed. Fall back if you need to." "No," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "We're not leaving until every horse is free." The canyon echoed with chaos as frightened horses galloped into the night, their cries blending with the shouts of the traffickers. Jackson moved swiftly through the melee, his heart pounding. Gunshots cracked in the distance, but his focus remained on the pens. Every second counted. Kate's team had taken up defensive positions, their presence enough to drive some of the traffickers into retreat. Still, a few remained, their silhouettes darting between the trailers. Jackson spotted a man attempting to corral a terrified mare. Without hesitation, he charged forward, shouting, "Let her go." The man turned, his expression twisted with anger. He lunged at Jackson, but years of ranch work had honed Jackson's reflexes. He dodged the attack and swung a hard punch, sending the man sprawling into the dirt. The mare bolted, her hooves barely missing the man's head. Rusty appeared at Jackson's side, barking furiously. Together, they pushed deeper into the camp. Jackson's eyes scanned the area, searching for any horses still trapped. His breath caught when he spotted a familiar figure, a dark Mustang standing alone, its body tense and trembling. "Thunder," Jackson whispered in disbelief. "Thunder." He approached cautiously, his heart aching at the sight of new scars crisscrossing the horse's flanks. Thunder flinched but didn't move, his eyes locking onto Jackson's. It was as if he recognized the man who had once freed him from the tracks. "I've got you, boy," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He cut the ropes binding Thunder's legs, his hands trembling with a mix of relief and fury. "They'll never hurt you again." Thunder didn't bolt like the others. Instead, he stood tall, his ears flicking toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Jackson turned just in time to see another trafficker, this one armed. The man raised his gun, and time seemed to slow. Before Jackson could react, Thunder let out a fierce cry and charged. The man stumbled back, his weapon clattering to the ground as Thunder's powerful hooves struck the dirt inches from him. The trafficker scrambled to his feet and fled, disappearing into the shadows. Jackson placed a hand on Thunder's neck, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved me, boy. Now let's finish this." By dawn, the traffickers were gone, their camp abandoned. Kate's team had rounded up the freed horses, herding them into a temporary corral. Jackson stood with Thunder, his body aching but his heart full. The Mustang's presence felt like a victory, a symbol of resilience in the face of cruelty. Kate approached, a rare smile softening her usually stern features. "We did it," she said. "The horses are safe, and we've got enough evidence to shut this operation down for good." Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on Thunder. It's not over for him, though. He's been through too much to just go back to the wild. Kate followed his gaze. "You thinking of keeping him?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. He reached out, stroking Thunder's mane. The Mustang leaned into the touch, a gesture of trust that brought a lump to Jackson's throat. "I think he's already decided that," he said finally. Back at the ranch, Jackson led Thunder into the corral, his steps slow and deliberate. Rusty followed, his tail wagging. The other horses greeted Thunder with soft nickers, their presence a comfort after the horrors he'd endured. Jackson leaned on the fence, watching as Thunder explored his new home. The scars on the Mustang's body were a stark reminder of his past, but they didn't diminish his strength or spirit. "You're home now," Jackson said quietly. "No one will ever hurt you again." As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the ranch, Jackson felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Thunder trotted toward him, his dark coat shining in the light. Jackson smiled, reaching out to meet the horse halfway. In that moment, man and Mustang stood together, a testament to the unbreakable bond forged through courage and trust. The days following the raid brought a sense of quiet purpose to Jackson's ranch. The rescued horses, once timid and broken, began to find their footing under Jackson's care. Among them, Thunder stood as a beacon of resilience, his powerful frame and sharp eyes a reminder of the battle they had won. Jackson had never been one for celebrations, but as the community gathered to see the rescued horses, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Neighbors brought supplies, bales of hay, medical kits, and tools to repair the corral. Kate stood near the fence, her arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "You've got quite the reputation now," she teased. Jackson chuckled, tipping his hat. "I didn't do it alone." His eyes drifted to Thunder, who was grazing peacefully in the pasture. Thunder's transformation was remarkable. His coat gleamed under the midday sun, and his scars, though still visible, seemed less severe. Jackson had spent hours working with him, teaching him to trust again. Each session was a small victory, Thunder accepting a halter without flinching, following Jackson's lead with quiet confidence. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Jackson decided it was time to take their bond to the next level. He saddled Daisy and led Thunder to the open field. The Mustang followed willingly, his movements fluid and unhurried. "You ready for this, boy?" Jackson asked, patting Thunder's neck. He placed the saddle on Thunder's back, watching for any signs of discomfort. The Mustang stood still, his ears flicking, but his body calm. Jackson mounted slowly, feeling the tension in Thunder's muscles. For a moment, they stood frozen, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind. Then, with a gentle nudge, Thunder moved. His steps were hesitant at first, but as Jackson guided him, the horse began to relax. Together, they rode across the field, the rhythm of Thunder's hooves steady and strong. For Jackson, the ride was more than just a test of trust. It was a reminder of everything they had endured and overcome. He thought of Luke, imagining his son's laughter echoing across the plains. "You'd have loved him," Jackson murmured, his voice carried away by the wind. By the time they returned to the ranch, stars dotted the sky. Thunder stood proudly as Jackson dismounted, his dark eyes gleaming with something close to contentment. Rusty barked excitedly, circling them as if to celebrate their achievement. Kate arrived the next morning with good news. The evidence gathered during the raid had led to several arrests, and the traffickers were facing serious charges. "It's over," she said, handing Jackson a folder with the finalized reports. Jackson nodded, relief washing over him. "About time. What's next for you?" Kate asked, her gaze drifting to Thunder, who was trotting along the fence line. Jackson didn't hesitate. "We move forward. Thunder stays here, and we keep building." Months passed, and the ranch became a sanctuary, not just for Thunder, but for other horses in need. Jackson worked tirelessly, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. The community rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. Thunder, once a symbol of pain and captivity, became the heart of the ranch. Children came to see him, their laughter filling the air as they watched him run free. For Jackson, Thunder represented more than survival. He was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could prevail. One crisp autumn morning, Jackson stood by the fence, watching as Thunder galloped across the pasture, his mane flying like a banner, his strides powerful and sure. Jackson smiled, his heart full. "You're free now," he said softly, the words carrying a weight of gratitude and love. As the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the ranch, Jackson felt a deep peace settle within him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with Thunder by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. Together, they had overcome the impossible. Thunder's journey from chains to freedom wasn't just a story of survival. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can triumph if we have the courage to stand against cruelty and the compassion to heal. If this story inspired you, remember that courage and compassion can overcome any challenge. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who loves heartfelt tales of redemption and connection. Together, let's spread the message that every life, human or animal, deserves a chance to shine.